All right. Hello, everyone. This is New Voices in Eco-Literature. Christine, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the LCLC for gathering us together and putting such an interesting collection of all of these papers together under the themes that have to do with eco-criticism and eco-literature. I'm newly retired from Ursuline College from the English department. I also work for the American Name Society, and a lot of my writing has to do with some of the some ways of scholarly looking at literature, sometimes with names and sometimes with other topics. So my topic today is one of my others, and what I have, I can show you, is a book that would fit into the category of literature, strong literature, Appalachian literature, and eco-literature. So I'm going to do a slideshow, slide share, if I can make this work. And let's see where, yes, share. And, aha. Okay, can you see that? Got that from Anna. Okay. So the book that I'd like to talk about for the next few minutes is called Keeping One Foot in Eden, Confession, and my topic then is confession in what Ron Rash gives us as I'm calling an Appalachian anti-paradise, because he makes all kinds of allusions to Eden, but it is clearly not a paradise. And if you don't yet know Ron Rash, I would suggest that you might, especially if you are interested in ecology and in some of the themes that play out that way in Appalachian literature, I would suggest that you become acquainted with him. He started out as a poet, and he then became a short story writer and then a fiction writer. I was interested in him this year because he just at the end of last year, as I was writing my proposal for the conference, he had just been named to the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. And in 2022, he just put out his most recent book called The Caretaker. So he was on my mind. And what we have then for this is his earliest book, earliest novel, I should say. So I went back 20 years and picked this one up again. It won the Novello Festival Prize. It was the Appalachian Book of the Year. It's characterized variously. It's definitely a character study, but it's characterized variously as a mystery and as an eco-narrative. Rash published it after 3 volumes of poetry and 2 collections of short stories. And as you can see here, he said that he hadn't really expected to write it as a novel. He started it as a poem, he changed it to a short story, and it turned out to be a novel, and obviously a prize-winning novel. What is the book? The book is a murder mystery, but it's a murder mystery without a body. And I would definitely put it in the category of Southern Gothic. There are 4 different parts to the book, each told in a different voice of one of the main characters. They all interact with each other and with the plot line. So there's the sheriff, there's the soon-to-be mother, Amy Holcomb, and her husband, Billy, their couple's son, and in the couple's son and in the deputy's portion, that takes place about 15, 18 years after the initial discussion. The missing body is the body of Holland Winchester, and everyone is pretty darn sure that he is dead, but nobody can find him. So I say to myself, what do I do with this book? And I look back and consider if this is a retrospective, looking back at a book that was written 20 years ago, there are so many different possible critical perspectives that you could use. Going back to the 1960s, and I could have gone back even farther, but I noticed that both eco-criticism and narratology, which is the position that I'm going to take, they both started developing. Their earliest developments were in the 1960s, and they become very important, I think, for this book. But I also know that in order to do justice to a book, it's going to be important to look at the particular perspectives of the author. Rash pays a lot of attention to the setting. It is embedded in Appalachia. I'm from Northern Ohio. We say Appalachia instead of Appalachia. It's a story of the impending flooding of the Jocassee Valley, and there's a pervasive sense of loss. He also has a real strong attention to the past. He talks about the tradition of the families and the tradition of the homeland there. And he's conscious of the historical setting. The Sheriff Will Anderson is a veteran of World War II. The person who is the one we have who's the husband is a victim of the polio epidemic. And the one who has been lost, Holland Winchester, is a veteran of the Korean War, and all of those things become part of it. In addition, he pays extremely close attention to the characters, and what he's looking at is who tells what parts of the story, in particular, who is guilty of what, and each of these people come out with a perspective for each of the 5 parts of the story. So I say, in looking at this, my choice is to look at this through the lens of narrative theory. And I think it's particularly important here. Peter Brooks gave us, about 25 years ago now, Reading for the Plot. And this is his newest, Seduced by Story, the use and abuse of narrative. And he says that in a culture that could have been a religious culture, a sacred culture, the human condition was explained in that way. But now in our secular culture, humans have to explain themselves to themselves, and that's why they tell stories. To add to that, James Phelan, who picks up some of Peter Brooks's theories, says that the judgments that readers make about narratives, the judgments that readers make are important. And he's going to continue by saying that when we read, we make ethical judgments, we make aesthetic judgments, and we make interpretive judgments. And I'm going to focus on the ethical that he makes. And because this is a murder mystery, because we're telling the story of who is guilty of what I'd like to bring in here would be confessional theory, which I would date through to, at least in its modern instance, Foucault, when he says that the human has become a confessing animal, that one constantly confesses one's crimes, one's sins, one's thoughts, one's desires, everything. Tambling picks that up in a very Foucauldian way and says that confession helps establish the private individual. We can look inside, we can look interiorly, and we can look at a personal history. And Terence Doody applies it particularly to the novel and says that it's an act by which a person explains himself and his or her life. Dennis Foster carries that out and says what becomes important is that confession creates a community, that confession creates complicity because it pulls the reader, it pulls the confessor into it. And so in this novel in particular, 5 people, all guilty of something. And this slide is really the heart of it. We have Will Anderson, who seems to be the moral anchor of the story, the good guy, the sheriff with a heart. But he understands that he has left his family behind. This first expression says it seemed a lake had spread between us. It was between himself and his father, himself and his family. And at the end, he was willing to say to the good and the bad, let's just let the water cover it up. Amy is the mother, soon to be mother. Amy is the one who starts the confusion by agreeing that if she cannot have a child by her husband Billy, she will have one. She's determined to have one. She will have one by Holland Winchester. And she says to the sheriff, we've got nothing to hide. And at the end, you can see the gap in time here. When there's the opportunity for her to tell what really happened, she says, just let the lake cover it all up, until finally she confesses and says it's got to be done. Billy, the husband who kills Holland Winchester, says we're going to act like nothing ever happened. But he knows in his heart he never got away with anything. And he says to the sheriff at the end, you can handcuff me, I won't run away. Isaac, the son who was born, at the end has to make his own ethical choice. He has to decide whether the bones that he has found, which would convict his non-biological father of murder, Should he carry them with him, or should he let them go under the water? And he chooses the second. And even the shortest section, the section for Bobby Murphy, who's the deputy, what he does is he lets the bones of the supposed witch just sink right down to the bottom, because he will not let them be buried in the new cemetery with his family. So what we have then, even in the way that the people describe it, is characters end up with a heroic quality. They have a poetic quality that speaks of a deep connection to the land. And the land is a land of history and loss. People looking for the Valley of the Lost, people looking for gold, people looking for botanical specimens, people looking for victory, and people looking for history. And through it all, Will Anderson knows that it'll all be underwater. He says that there would be a time when it would just be total. So what this does then in interpreting the story is it tells us that narratology merges with confession theory, and it blends us in an ecocentric setting that's going to be changed forever. The last line of the story is Bobby Murphy, the deputy, driving out of Jocassee forever and saying this was a place for the lost. And I say that through it, what we see in it is this compulsion to confess. When the good guy, the sheriff, is reflecting, he says it's a kind of yearning. A preacher would say it's man's condition since leaving Eden. And one of the things that will be lost, I threw this in just for those of you that want an image of the truth of the wildflowers. There's this one very rare flower, Oconee bells, that exists only in this area of Georgia and the Carolinas. And this was going to be recorded. This was going to be lost under the water too. So I think that we probably have some time at the end, maybe for discussion and questions. I have a selective bibliography, and I have the happy choice of turning it over to our next speaker.
Hi everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, good.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. I was having some lagging issues with the computer, but I think I'm connecting okay. Were you able to introduce yourself before your presentation, or do you want me to still introduce you to the group? I think your mic is off.
Yes, thank you. Per kind of suggested that, so I did, and you can now introduce whoever the next speakers are.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Before that, my name's Nina Hani Jang, and I'm honored to chair the session today. Next panelist we have is Anna Leahy. And Anna's books include the poetry collection, If in Some Cataclysm, What Happened Was, and Aperture, and the nonfiction book Tumor. Her work has won top awards from Mississippi Review, Los Angeles Review, Ninth Letter, and Dogwood, and appears at Aeon, Atlanta Review, The Atlantic, Bennington Review, BuzzFeed, Poetry, Scientific American, The Southern Review, and elsewhere. She edits Tap Journal and has been a fellow at McDowell and the American Library in Paris. All right, with that, Anna, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I think I will try to share. Can you see the slideshow there? Is that appearing for you all? All right. Stop me if the technology goes awry or if you have a pressing question. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own poems. Let me just set a timer here as well. I've called this Wingbeat and Seed because I'm thinking about birds and plants quite a bit these days. And I'll start with a poem about a hummingbird. There is an Anna's hummingbird. It has a a naming history that is very colonialist. That's not quite part of the poem, but it is something in the background. And I've been thinking a lot about form. I'm using Paisley Rekdal's new book, Real Toad's Imaginary Gardens, in my class. And it's a book about the craft of writing, but also about the craft of reading and beginning with noticing. And so in looking at this presentation, I tried to think about what a reader might notice before even having read the poem. And so this poem, to me, it's very important that it's in couplets. And for me, that reflects the pairs of wings as well as beating of wings. So let me read this poem. I whisper my name to a hummingbird because there's a lesson in this somewhere that can't be counted at 50 wing beats per second, 25 miles per hour. This body shimmies past faster than that. Let us whisper iridescence as if into metal, the bird's metallic buzz. Let us hang hope like a bright red gorget, the only red crown. Hope hangs loose like fire, like spider silk sewing the nest of our next life, the lichen, a light camouflage. Suppose I die before this hummingbird tongues all the nectaries. Worlds might explode, or that's the sound of feathers I hear when this exquisite bird hums my given name. After Audre Lorde's Hanging Fire. So I'm also thinking about how my poems that connect with nature also connect with a literary tradition that may or may not be about nature. Another important formal decision I made in this poem was to make the title the first line of the poem so that it was a flowing there right at the beginning. And what I did with this poem, and I've done this to a couple of other of my poems now as well, is that I employed erasure on my own work. And so I came up with these two alternate versions that are also part of this thinking about how we tell stories of the human-made world and the natural world and the intersections of those. So I erased text to leave a different poem on the page. And the first one is called Whisper, and it actually becomes a prayer at the end because of that attribution or reference to Audre Lorde's poem. So whisper, a lesson, count faster, whisper hope, hang like silk of light before tongues explode. Hear my name, Lord. And that's an erasure that I did not intend when I had written the original. So I really wrote the original as a standalone poem and then employed these erasures. The next erasure is name a humming. Name a humming somewhere, oh wingbeat, oh body buzz, oh red gorge, oh, 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 if then hum to all the worlds this exquisite And so I was thinking in this poem about how to capture the sounds of bodies. And it ends up, I think, to be more the human body than a hummingbird body. And the bird has sort of disappeared, but not completely disappeared because the wing beat is still there. The other thing that I did in this erasure, which strangely felt brave, was to not treat the words as words, but really look at the letters instead of the words and take letters out of their words. And that got me thinking about displacement and erasure and the tradition of erasure that we have as human beings and in relation to the environment. The next poem I'll read is called Oiled Bird Season. The first three poems there were published in Prairie Schooner. This one appeared in a collection called In the Tempered Dark, and it's a collection I highly recommend. It's an anthology of poems about transcending elegy, so poems about grief. And most of them are about grief over losing humans, but I thought it was important to include something about grief over losing other creatures and the destruction that humans have made on the earth. The other great thing about this anthology in the Tempered Dark, it's from Black Lawrence Press, is that each poet in the anthology included a short micro essay about the poems. And that was about the instigation of the poems, but also very much about the formal choices in the poems. And so it's a great book to teach with if you are teaching poetry as literature, contemporary literature, or in a creative writing class. I very much wanted this to have a back and forth rhythm, in part because when birds are damaged in oil spills, there is the act of saving, but there is so little progress. So many birds die in the act of saving. So I wanted there to be forward progress, but always this return to the original state. And that's how I hope the tercets, the stanzas work with the indentations. We'll get through this, someone says, and even those who don't say it believe it. And I almost believe it too, and also know we don't know what it means to go through. From a distance, all slick and sheen, right here a matted mess and sleek shivering. Something's seeped from a crack in the earth's crust, busted open off the coast of our existences. Something's leaking. Preening sludge is a colossal waste of ongoing as much as it is a measure of going on. A feather might be mistaken, vein for obsidian blade. The bird beaches to avoid drowning. Its keel holds the heart with so many ways to be wounded in the saving. This was also written as the pandemic was lifting, and so I think it's secretly about the pandemic as well. Murky Waters is a poem that has not been published and that I wrote in response in part to visiting the Ridges, which is a place in Door County, Wisconsin, where Lake Michigan has made these fascinating swales that move up and down. And there are species there that are present almost nowhere else. And so they've got, and there's another poem about this in the collection too, but they've got restoration programs for orchids and irises and other plants. And so this is a poem that was in response to that. And one of the things that I tried to do was create a form that felt a little bit like water. And I come from a publishing production background way back before I was a professor. And these lines in the text, or the lack of text that creates these things in production, those are called rivers. And so I wanted to play with that idea of creating rivers in a poem. And so I inserted these spaces of equal spacing, but separated the phrases with them so that they don't appear in columns, but they create these rivers in the poem. You may think the human body is mostly water, but it's a lie to say we're an ocean in this world of fishers and fish. We've made the sea mercurial with gold and fossils, and it's muddled our thoughts, muscled our mouths, our maws. Maws are also bags of air that belong to bony fish that buoy their bodies. Swim bladders become such a tasteless delicacy. Human hunger fillets another old-growing orange roughy, filches another bluefin without flinching. The blue walleye is forgotten. Blame the rainbow smelt, something shiny that hooks the human eye. People can be fickle like that. We recognize aggression and weak swimmers. So much of our lungs is water that we could argue aspiration is a way to drown by breathing. The human body uses its water to make waste. There's a shy porpoise entangled in the fence of gill net. Its body shares the bones of the human ear and the chambers of our heart, and its brain spindles like ours. It's caught thinking. It's caught in human thoughtlessness. We can now count this entire species on our two hands, like blood. We can turn even a fellow mammal into yet another myth. Here's a poem called Celestial Declination, and it too uses the tercets, but no stanza breaks, so it flows in a different way than Oiled Bird Season, but I was toying with the same kinds of formal decision making in this poem. The other thing I'm doing with this poem is playing with time, which I think is becoming more important in my work about nature, because I think we're so inculcated in thinking in human time, and that's not the only way to think. So I'm playing with time in this poem. Celestial Declination. Tomorrow afternoon, I walk up the side of a mountain. Sometimes sun forces squint. At other moments, nothing celestial here in the penumbra of the world I thought I knew. It's a bit of exercise to clear my head and get my heart squeezing faster. It's what we do, this walking, this looking for stars all the time. Next week, I sleep late with ache, and when I rise, I am able to revise a sentence as if tidying up my own garland of terrestrial history. Next year, I travel farther from home, farther from draft, on breeze through astronomical paraphrase I didn't expect to write. On trajectories I've toured but still get lost following. It's not easy to lose a sense of direction when you remember where you were yesterday and time travels too steadily to get lost for a while in the tomorrows of the past. Sometimes focus blurs, at other moments sharp resolution. A year from now is so different that I do not remember this path where light leaves forever in the almost shadow of eclipse season that may not arrive in my lifetime. And then this poem is about sagebrush, and it's also a response to the wildfires in California. I wrote this long before this year, but the wildfires are becoming a more frequent and more frequently devastating occurrence here. When sagebrush sprouts from rhizome, growing itself from itself, this pungent shrub has a far fairer shot at survival than if seedlings must go it alone in a new charred world. The cheatgrass is waiting for fire to sweep sagebrush to ash. After fire, cheatgrass will be quick to colonize. Then sagebrush is suddenly all about wind and wing returning seed and then seedling, its radical, its little root burrowing toward hope, a future of silvery green-gray, a late summer yellow that will be hard to come by. As with all things are not equal. Sagebrush is full of camphor. Camphor is the voice of sagebrush. Beware, beware. Nearby sagebrush respond, release their aroma to ward off the toothy threat grazing, but whatever's on the verge of flame is eavesdropping, waiting to spark, to crown. Camphor clears the head, clears the stench of death. When it burns fast. And then these are about the fence lizards that are bounding around in my backyard and all over the neighborhood as soon as it gets warm enough for them to come out in the day. And this is another poem where I wanted the title of the poem to run right into the poem. The fence lizards are sunning themselves, and I'm jealous, not only of basking, but also of their swiftness, their coordination, the force of limb to limb, and they're gone. This is the balance of any creature's energy, conservation and expenditure, Even these blue belly lizards know you cannot bend and breathe all at once. Let's call it a clutch then, this bending of fingers, this hyperextension, this pocketbook of rainy days, this future of impossible hatchlings. Let's call it brumation, when this weathering, this wintering in discontent. Let's eat the social insects. Let's call it sit and wait. Let's call it lie in wait. Let's not call this jealousy. No, let's say it's an arid appreciation, rare want. Oh, ectothermic life, this bite that cures, the tick of time. Let's draw a breath to scale. And I think I'll end there, and hopefully we can have some discussion at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Next, we have Felix Bernstein. And Felix Bernstein stages psycho-fictional scenes as lectures, essays, satire, and melodrama using errant bodies of imagery and discourse to bore holes through crusty ideals. He's the author of Burn Book, Nightboat 2016, and Notes on Post-Conceptual Poetry, insert blank press 2015, and director with Gabe Rubin of Madame du Bois 2018. He has performed at institutions including Artist Space, LA MoCA, Luma West Bow, and the Whitney Museum of American Art.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Not my sound, optimized for video editing. Okay. Now my QuickTime video. Okay, let's see. It'll probably lag, but okay. Do people see my screen and me and hear me? I don't hear anyone, but there's someone.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Good. Okay. All right. So I'll start this video and I will also start a little timer so I don't go over the time. I'm honored to be speaking here about conchomania or conchomania, a disease that seems increasingly grave as we sculpt our bodies and psyches to fit the shell mold of the iPhone's invisible code, which preemptively shapes and holds us before we even have the chance to cling to it, to desire it, or psychically inscribe it. This algorithmic molding casts us all in the role of the most incitable beings possible, all the more dependent on the relief of the device that arouses us. I'll start by speaking of Alfred Binet, the French psychologist who invented the idea of mental age. And I'll pause this video for a second because it begins with Proust. The video is out of order, no matter what, but let's fix it out of order. So Alfred Binet, who, like Freud, was a protege of Charcot, in his obscure 1894 contribution to marine biology titled The Psychic Life of Microorganisms, he makes an elaborate psychomorphic allegory. What Binet strives to prove is that the minimal criteria of psychic life can be met by certain amoeba-like microorganisms known as difflugia. His proof is that difflugia can synthesize a shell out of mineral particles for its offspring, in this way exhibiting crucial functions of memory, retention, and anticipation. Maybe I can show you a difflugia, actually. Yeah, this is a difflugia.
Who's that?
They look like this. So yeah, they collect. What he's getting at is that they're like little collectors. They make their shell out of collections of particles. So the synthesizing of a shell conveys a kind of architectural mastery that goes beyond simply relying on nature as a given, but rather transforms matter using the tools of reflexive knowledge, according to Binet, who invents the idea of mental age, which becomes IQ. Binet signals a rupture from those who want to see absolute discontinuity between the categories of the great chain of being, concluding that a higher animal is nothing more than a colony of protozoans.
Oh my god.
that's how we see things now too, which is that where humans were made up of little microorganisms and clusters of microorganisms, but Vinne is signaling a rupture. The ability for a parent to synthetically forge a container or rim for their child ends up being a trope throughout psychoanalysis that relies on the idea of a shell. The trope of a shell, a rim, and amoeba are prominent, especially in the work of Freud. Freud frequently uses crusty metaphors for psychic development. Amoebas extending and withdrawing pseudopods to test their environment, amoebas engulfing food, and in 1920s, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, he compares the human to an invertebrate and suggests we develop a cortical psychic shell as a stimulus barrier by hardening and burning our outermost surfaces, using terms that in English would be rind, cortex, crust, bark, shield, cauterized skin. The German is Hul, Hirnrinde, Schultz, Schutz, Schutz. Moreover, Freud compared early infancy to the solipsistically sealed bird in the eggshell, a state of monadic interiority. The shell infant metaphor has a history of being taken literally. 18th century science speculated that humans temporarily had a hard shell in the womb. And shell infant tropes reached their climax in the 1990s with psychoanalytic theories of autism, most famously English analyst Frances Tustin's book, The Protective Shell in Children and Adults. Tustin theorized that the shell as a kind of ego boundary serves as a to form a strict insularity with the mother or a machine. So whether it's the mother or the machine, the infant adhesively glues to it, and so that there's no differentiation. So this ends up being a trope used throughout the psychoanalytic theory of autism, which has been thoroughly discredited. And some of the people who proposed this idea of de-differentiation later turned against it. Notably, Freud rejected the term autism, a contraction of his preferred term autoeroticism. And what is stressed in the analytic theory of autism is typically attachment, not drive. Psychoanalytic theories of autism claim that a de-differentiated adhesive relationship with the mother or world or gadget walls in the autistic subject, sealing them from relationality. As this state has no gap or loss, according to psychoanalysis, there's no room for desire, which is why it's asexual, considered asexual. The conservative strain of analysis prescribes that there must be an intervention into this bubble that breaks up the mutual containment of the autistic person with their mother or with the world or with the machine. But more recent theories, such as by Leon Brenner and Jean-Claude Malvel, have suggested ways the autist can synthesize dynamic rim barriers made of flexible shapes that permit intersubjective desire and attunement, which I call skintums instead of symptoms and symptoms instead of symptoms, and that they're synthesized at the level of the skin, but they are like symptoms in that they're compromise formations to navigate between the outside world and the self. And I would add that we all make use of autistic objects, rim barriers, and shells to function socially, whether that be the mirror that holds up our image or the phone that contains and conditions our experience. But to move on very briefly from psychoanalysis to literature, I'm going to begin with Proust, who suffered from a rare form of Catholic concomania. For the narrator in the Search of Lost Time, for the narrator of In Search of Lost Time, a fixed idea was set in place when he first saw scallop shells carved in an altar to Saint Jacques, the first martyred apostle, the patron saint of Spain. The scallop has been thought to symbolize the clasping of hands in prayer and also to be a depiction of two shields. Bivalve shells in Christian iconology often suggested resurrection, reminiscent of the pagan myths of Venus emerging from a shell, which became a key emblem of the Renaissance. St. James is also said to have rescued a drowning knight by encrusting him with scallop shells. Originally, sacred emblems of the pilgrimage were shells collected from the graveyard of the saint that indexed direct haptic contact with the saint. However, eventually reproductions and abstractions of the shell were permitted, though not without the danger of being rendered into knickknacks and moldy patterns. Clothes, sanctuaries, coffins, hospitals all became littered with the image of the shell in honor of Saint Jacques. To be covered in shell badges was a mark of honor, proof of service. To be branded, to be sanctified, to be blessed, to be baptized, to be protected, contained, armored, and shelled. Proust's Madeleine pastry in the scallop shape was one of many forms of emblem reproduction derived from this pilgrimage, and was a common baking mold for sponge cakes by the 19th century. So it is unsurprising that Marcel's most famous epiphany is structured around this cake, which is, quote unquote, the little scallop shell of pastry, so richly sensual under its severe religious folds. The bread, first drafted as toast, is transubstantiated when dipped in tea through an act of alchemical necromancy. The dry shell's creaturely inwardness revived by communion with water, the crusty psyche replenished with wet memory, leading to what Julia Kristeva found to be a sacred profane dissolution of boundaries. And she notes that tea was slang for piss, and that communion was piss drinking in certain homosexual circles at the time. But we cannot forget the crusty manufacturing of knickknacks and ornaments as the Madeleine's destiny, from its tin mold to the strategically fabricated memory of a man who would forge his own death mold for us all to happily snuggle into. Proust's narrator is a militant concho or conchocentric, for whom shell forms carry an originary voice that inaugurates an oceanic dissolution of past, present, inside, outside, aunt, nephew, aunt, mother, a reconnecting of the human with the primordial ooze of the sea. Shells emerge in the intertidal zone of land and sea, inviting aquatic phantasms, also called seashell resonance, or the mythic hope that a seashell could be a phone to the ocean, that those are waves rather than your own pulse or atmospheric pressure that you're hearing in the shell. Proust similarly seemed to suffer from a form of auto-encrustation. For sexual stimulation, he was said to frequent a brothel, where a boy would stand and masturbate in front of him while he lay in bed tucked under covers, with just his eyes peeping out. In this mode, he seems to take after a species of hermit crab known as the blanket crab, a crustacean that uses sea anemones as a shield, which it regularly tugs up and down. The shell is a bilateral transitional object. It can move the subject towards the world or backwards into a retreat where there's no transitions. Further research into Proust's slimy covers is necessary. Sticky emissions caught in protective religious folds that have yet to be uncovered by thorough research. Paul Valéry, Francis Ponge, and Le Corbusier all found shells to be an ambiguous object that resisted categorization or allegorization, the perfect thing in itself, the hylomorphic unity of form and matter. Corbusier went so far as to find in the shell the modular metric by which all society should be measured via the golden ratio of its spiral. Beginning in the 50s was the unit that Le Corbusier used for many of his major buildings in the 50s. Moreover, like, for Ponge, the poet Ponge, our natural human shell is language. He claimed that geniuses like Mallarmé find their place snugly inside of words, which form for the poet a proportionately life-size house or tomb or shell. The mysterious formation of shell leads to notions of semi-divine emanation. Ponge claimed the seashell for aestheticism in 1790 by claiming it as a species of free, undetermined, and purposeless beauty. Rococo, which is what he was referring to in a somewhat pejorative way as a Rococo phobe, is named after roque, shellwork, pebblework, which in turn is derived from the same root as rock. While Rococo has come to exemplify the superficial aspect of the shell, the fashion of purposeless exteriors, Baroque has become prized for its seriousness, its dark interiority. Suitably, the Baroque is named after the irregular, ovoid, curved, pinched, lumpy pearls formed in the interior of the shell, which were the basis of the monstrous pedants collected by Anna de Medici. So Rococo and Baroque are both named after the shell. I'll end with Walter Benjamin, who was a melancholic concocentrist, and in aping Proust to make his own memoir, he claims the entire 19th century was contained before him in a seashell, writing, "Like a mollusk in its shell, I had my abode in the 19th century, which now lies hollow before me like a large, dead, cold, empty shell." When put to his ear, the shell still carried sounds. Let us call these sounds the acoustic unconscious, indicating that Benjamin's childhood world was not obliterated, but rather became crusted over into a reified relic, which would require conscientious effort to break back into. The withdrawn past can be found in the shell it withdraws into. The obsolete shell has the radical potential to awaken or reanimate the corpse of the crustacean within. Benjamin finds the telephone, with its alienating ring and disembodied voice, one of the shell shocks of modernity. In contrast, he finds comfort in the murmuring seashell, which is nostalgic and softening. Both shell and telephone receiver are referred to in German with the same word, muschel, or muschel. Benjamin's figurative use of the shell phone reminds us of the sweet and soft memories conjured by the Madeleine, and also of William Wordsworth's 1848 poem, The Excursion, where a smooth-lipped shell became a device for tranquilizing recollection. Benjamin also writes of contemporary life under capitalism as involving the mechanical reproduction of shell-like forms, writing, "The interior is not only the private citizen's universe, it is also his casing. Living means leaving traces. In the interior, these were stressed. Coverings, boxes, and casings were devised in abundance, in which the traces of everyday life were molded. The resident's own traces were also molded in the interior." So he's figuring the shell as a kind of prison and a kind of opening to memory. So to skip very much further to the end, I think that we must end there for time, actually, but further research must be done to draw out the comorbidities between concomania and related conditions, including the way technological obsolescence permits the cutting off and throwing away of the shell, such that the platform can remain perpetually conformed to our latest existence, contracting and expanding our frames and dilating our apertures, as a way to maintain, like Benjamin's bourgeois interior, shells and shells. Well, our phones are shells and shells that we endlessly unbox and strip tease and unveil towards newer and dilated images that uncover more and more of the body that we can't get to. The trajectory of these shelf-like phones is set in advance, superseding, calculating, predicting, outpacing, titrating, and overgrowing our desires, finally stripping us of the need to have desire, a kind of unjoyment which precedes our ability to attach, enjoy, perceive, or affirm, but knows and presets these abilities on our behalf, which is a way to say that the gadget has sex for us or synthesizes our sex. Such a shellacking of existence requires holding fast to the obsolescent shells of the subject as they seemingly rot away in a series of improvements and bug fixes. So the solution is nostalgic conchomania. And stop my share. Thank you. Oh, I didn't mean to remove it. I hope that that came out clear enough without too much lagging. Back to you, Nina.
Okay, thank you, Felix. And last but not least, we have Karris McCollum. She's a fiction MFA MA candidate at McNeese State University. She's also a fiction editor for the McNeese Review and managing editor of Boudin. Her chapbook, We Obedient Children, won the 2024 Etchings Press chapbook contest in prose. Her short work has recently appeared or in forthcoming in 100-Word Story, Fourth Genre Magazine, Eunoia Review, Mount Hope Magazine, X-Ray Magazine, and Gargoyle Online, among others.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So today I'm going to be reading 3 different flash fiction pieces from the chapbook that Nina just mentioned. I'm also a musician, so I kind of see them as like movements of a greater piece of music, not just like in a collection, but movements of something much larger. So there are 3 flash fiction pieces, well, 2 flash fiction stories, and then 1 flash essay. So I'll go right into it. All right, the first, I like to think of them as movements. We'll call them movements. The first movement is Colleen, or the girl. The girl had always wanted a rose like her mother's. Her mother's rosebush had grown from a small cutting of her mother's, whose roses grew from her grandmother's, and so on, all the way back to England, or so it was said. The blossoms were round and full like heads of cabbage, so heavy that the fragile stems bowed. Blush pink skin closed over dewy, ruby insides. No one grows these anymore, her mother once said, just us. And for good reason. The roses had always been sickly. From the cradle, the girl helped her mother mash the spiders that plagued the rosebush and fed on the gentle bugs that lived between the petals. But they always came back. The only time the flowers ever thrived was around their owners' deaths. The family learned not to attempt cuttings outside these times. And so, without realizing it, the girl was waiting for her mother to die. Right before her 18th birthday, the girl got her cutting. After her mother's funeral, she dug a hole in the field behind the house and planted her bush over her mother's grave, barely more than a stick with a single flower. She listed every rule her mother had taught her about the care of roses. She pinned it to the wall above her vanity mirror so she'd never forget. Every morning she woke up with the sun to weed and hunt down spiders while the dew still gilded their webs. Every other bush may have sickened, she thought, but not mine. Still, the vibrant stem turned yellow and mushy. The rotten outer layers of the blossom peeled away, exposing sick flesh within. The gentle bugs took refuge inside the rose's deepest layers and refused to come out where the spiders waited. The girl told herself that it could not be helped after all. If her love for her mother wasn't enough to nourish the flowers, then nothing could. But still, as she kneeled before her mother's grave, beneath her withering rose, she could not quell the feeling that she had failed the woman buried there. The girl redoubled her efforts, crushing horrid spiders until the sun bore down, until a spider who could not bear to see any more of her sister's murdered bit. The girl had barely registered the pain when she collapsed in the dirt. She woke up in agony with venom corroding her veins. When she spoke, her father, sitting at her bedside, raised his head. His face was flushed and glistening with anxious sweat, but he smiled and wrapped her in his arms. I thought I was going to lose you too. The girl buried her head in his shoulder. She was not yet certain that his fears had been proven wrong. She hurt down to the marrow in her bones. Every muscle resisted her commands. But she did not die. Not yet. Almost every day, she suffered a little less. On clear days, she would have her father open the curtains, looking out over the back field, and could see her single rose raising its magnificent head to the sky. At first, she wondered if this meant that her recovery was illusory, that she would one day lapse in emotionlessness when her father looked away. But still, she lived. The first time she felt strong enough to leave the house, she, with her father's assistance, shuffled out to where her rose grew. She was not yet within 10 feet of it before she could smell its perfume. Weeds and vines had wrapped around its feet, anchoring it firmly to the ground. Spiders had woven webs out of silver thread between the blossom and the yearning leaves. Without the girl's misguided care, the spiders had protected the rosebush from the beetles eating it from the inside, and the weeds had allowed the roots to take firm hold. The girl knelt, wishing she knew how to apologize in the language of spiders. But as she watched them tirelessly spin their thread, she sensed she was already forgiven. So that's the end of the first section. As you can see, there's a lot of exploration about the symbols of roses and spiders, specifically as it informs how we think about women. Because I basically, a lot of my fiction work has to do with the female body, the alienation thereof, and the different symbols that we use to represent female kind. So in this case, we've got basically the dichotomy of these two categories that we like to put women in, of the completely incorruptible, delicate rose, and then the venomous spider, and that maybe there's a synergy between the two of them. I actually think I'm going to share, let's see if I can do it. I'm going to share the cover of this because it very much feeds into the symbolism of that particular story. We're going to switch writing styles a little bit for the middle section. Like I said, a lot of this has to do with like female bodies. This one is from the perspective of a character who takes agency from the female body. So this movement, does everyone see the cover?
Yes.
Cool, thank you. So the next movement is Sadako, or the chaste child. When Tahira first recommends that you watch the Japanese original of The Ring, you say she's crazy for liking that freaky stuff. You've never understood the appeal of surrendering to fear for fun. Fear is scary. You prefer fast-paced movies about muscled heroes doing what they want and always, always winning in the end. But then came that rumstick night and the miscommunication, and now you guys don't talk much anymore. You're not sure how things went wrong or how it's your fault when she's the one who changed her mind. Sometimes you want to ask others in the crew what they think, but you always stop before you get to the heart of the question. Everyone knows that alcohol fuels fires, yet somehow everyone's always surprised when things ignite. So tonight you're bored, stoned, and alone, with increasing frequency these days. You're in the rare mood to watch one of the movies you promised to see years ago, and look at that, you can stream Dingu for free. So you do. And what a movie, fuck. What is up with that doctor? The guy rapes the ghost girl, Sadako, before she's a ghost, obviously, then finds out afterwards that she's hermaphroditic and kills her for it. But like, if he's worried sleeping with a pretty ladyboy makes him gay, it's kind of too late. That's not in the American version, and you're worried for any country where this is mainstream entertainment. The credits roll and you have so many things to say. You're formulating the witty, bullet-pointed text you're going to send Ben when your back pocket vibrates. Unlisted number on your smartphone screen, probably a scammer. But you're waiting to hear back from the clinic and don't know their number, so you answer. You will die in 7 days. You nearly drop the phone, heart pounding. Then you manage a word. Tahira? The young woman on the other end giggles. No, I'm Sadako. You can imagine her wiggling her fingers theatrically, wherever she is. Hey, you say, how'd you know I was watching it? Ben said so. Damn it, Guy never keeps his mouth shut, does he? Not for his life. You force a laugh, hoping she'll keep speaking. Maybe if she keeps talking like normal, you can keep being friends like normal. But she waits for you. So what's up, you ask? It's been a while since we last, shit, gotta go. Talk to you later, and don't forget, you will die in 7 days. She hangs up. You usually have nightmares after watching horror movies, but this one gets you bad. It's not awful in the daytime, but you realize on day 3 that you've been leaving the hall light on overnight. You avoid walking past the living room to pee. You don't like the way the TV screen blurs out your reflection beyond recognition, like police cam footage scrambled to protect suspects' identities. Sometimes Netflix asks if you're still watching, and when you press yes, there's a half frame of black that you come to fear. In that half second, it's not Sadako you see, but Tahira. You're extra edgy on the 7th day, but you're in luck. It's a Saturday. So instead of hanging around your apartment, waiting for Sadako to crawl through the TV and stuff you in a closet, you meet Ben at the bar. You drink too many whiskey sours and tongue a chubby blonde in the corner near the emergency exit. There aren't even any Asian chicks there. You survive. The blonde calls you back the next day. At first, you think it's the weird unlisted number Tahira called from, but it's 1 digit off. You realize you're disappointed. You ignore it. The day after, Ben cancels the weekly movie night. He says he feels crappy, and you tell him to keep his crap to himself. You regret polishing off his old-fashioned when he wasn't looking. Then again, alcohol does kill germs. You offer to host movie night instead, but no one in the group chat responds. Though you're hypervigilant of cold and flu symptoms, you don't get sick. The next week, Ben and Caitlin are busy studying for an exam. The week after that, no one mentions the movie night at all. Gradually, the group chat slows and then stops until one day there's a notification. Tahira has left the chat. Your phone buzzes and shows a familiar number. Your heart pounds, expecting Tahira's voice, but it's just the blonde again. You guys meet at your place and smoke and fuck. She asks you to choke her, and you do, pushing her into the bed as if holding her head underwater. Even when her resistance turns to desperate clawing, you don't stop until you finish. She does not speak to you as she collects her clothes and leaves. Why? Wasn't that what she wanted? Days pass, Ben calls. He is plastered out of his skull, voice husky and raucous. Tahira's dead, man. No preamble. You hear soft voices in the background, though Ben must be yelling into the phone. What? Yep, killed herself this morning. Left a note. No fucking way I'm reading it, but Caitlin won't shut up about it. He laughs erratically. Ben would never think to be this cruel if it weren't true, if grief weren't forcing his mind into strange shapes. She basically saved me the trouble. You know what she's telling people? What, you say, licking your lips. She's saying you raped Tahira. I knew something fucky happened between you guys, but that dude, what the hell? You find an excuse to hang up on Ben. As soon as you do, you wish he was still there, talking over your thoughts. So they think you're a rapist, like that guy in the movie, that doctor. But you would never do something like that. Caitlin should know better. Tahira's Facebook page corroborates her death. Post after post, happy pictures with friends, her mom, her niece, and nephew. One of the pictures was taken the night you last saw her, before the crew took off and left you two alone. Her hair smelled like shampoo that night. Something floral, a flower you can't place. Your mind bends into strange shapes now too. You can't sleep. You get out of bed and turn on the hall light. Back in bed, the mattress is soft under you and you're sinking, unable to breathe. The sheets smell like flowers, and the next day you buy new laundry detergent. When you brush your teeth, there are spiders in the sink and you wash them down the drain. When you rifle through your notepad, the words all blur except your name. Days pass. You're so tired, so tired, so tired, so tired. Shadows creep at the edges of your vision. You dust the corners and spiders scramble out of the way into deeper crevices in your home, in your sanctuary. You're afraid to put your shoes on or reach into dark drawers. You know the spiders are waiting for you there. They're watching you. Sometimes when you pass your bedroom, you think there's dark hair splashed out on your pillow. It always disappears when you look at it, but the rosy scent left on your pillows perfumes your half dreams. You keep the door closed. This is worse because it means the hair never goes away. 7 days after Tahira's suicide, you drag yourself to bed, though you know it won't help. The hair drapes over your cream pillows and sheets, and tonight it doesn't vanish when you fix your gaze. You reach toward it, too tired to tremble, and hook your finger around the black curls. Tahira is staring at you, unblinking and livid. You try to turn, to leave, to undo, but her hands shoot out from under the blanket and seizes your wrist. Icy legs and arms wrap around you. Didn't you want this? She ties you into knot around herself, one shattered bone at a time. When she's done, your combined 8 limbs hang over the edges of the bed, and all the little spiders find refuge under the blankets with you. So that one is dealing with a lot of the symbolism that shows up specifically like Japanese style, like horror. And the idea of monstrosity, the idea of the fact that in a lot of folklore around the country, most ghosts tend to be women, and most of those women tend to be victims of violent crimes. Why is it that we, across the world, human cultures, turn female victims of violent crime into the monsters in our stories? And is that a source of empowerment, or is that a last-ditch attempt to deprive them of their humanity? So the last one that I'm going to read is called Junko, the Obedient Child. This is a flash essay. You, Furuta Junko, you were real and you lived for a while. If your life had unfolded as it should have, I would not know your name. But now, across the world, you are Junko Furuta, Japanese contorted into foreign sounds and arranged in the wrong order. You have been reduced to the part of your life you had the least power to predict. Your abduction, your captivity, your rape, your torture, your murder. You're the girl in the concrete encased high school girl murder case. The Meskose and the Meskose Concreto Tsume Satsujinjiken. Here is what is known about you. Your parents didn't name you with foreign syllables. They called you Junko, obedient child. For 17 years, every letter, every roll call paid homage to your obedience. Before your 18th birthday, on your way home from school, one boy kicked you off your bike and the other offered you help. And you, obedient child, accepted. You didn't know they were both Yakuza. You didn't know that what would happen in the 40 days to follow would make me nauseous 50 years after and 7,000 miles away. It's known that by the end, it was only the rotting smell of your still living body that kept their hands off of you. Here is what I think I know about you. There is a story online about the mahjong game the boys made you play. According to the story, you were not so obedient. You refused to let them win, moving tiles with your broken fingers, and in their anger, they lit you on fire. The fire part is true. The mahjong thing may not be. Someday, I predict, this mahjong game that may not have happened will play a vital part of the ghost story that you will become. You will be the mahjong onna, the mahjong woman, a wraith of Japan, like Kuchisaki onna, Teke Teke, and Hanako-san. What real suffering underlies the stories of your restless sisters? No one remembers. Someday you will also be the monster of your story, everyone's worst fear cast in human form, hiding in shadows untouched by the neon lights of Tokyo, challenging lone men with dark hearts to games of mahjong they will never win, lighting them up like paper lanterns when they don't. Men will think you are the scary one, but women know better. Women will not fear you. They fear the boys who turn girls into ghosts. Here is what I imagine about you. As you rode your bike for the last time, I imagine you must have smelled like roses, because that's what I smelled like. In your shower, I see the same pink plastic bottle that sat in mine on the nights I didn't come home. The only difference is the Japanese label. I never forget your name because I was also 17. Did they trap you in a basement too? Did the cold of the cinderblock walls soak through your naked skin? Did you see the spiders, tiny and delicate, watching with many eyes from deep corners? I did. Bent over the back of a couch, throat raw with alcohol I did not want, but obediently drank. My spider was beautiful, the only lovely thing in an ugly moment, in an ugly summer. I studied her like I would die if I looked away, the scent of roses dripping out of my hair and catching in her web. With mercy and love, she turned me to unfeeling stone with her black pearl gaze, blessed me with a body made of edged flint, harder and sharper than flesh. When the next man seized me, I imagined my skin opening into many jagged mouths and crushing his slithery fingers inside. I am not Karris, not graceful anymore. I am the monster whose skin chews through bone. I am Medusa with spider legs for hair. Sadako, crawling on my belly through dark basement doors someone should have closed. I am not you, Miss Furuta, a real child subjected to horrors I cannot imagine. But when the mahjong woman challenges another cocksure stud to a game, I will share her satisfaction in victory. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you to all of our panelists for their wonderful presentations. I think we actually ran out of the time, but do we want to still have a couple of minutes for questions among ourselves, or do you all have to head out? Any questions or thoughts to share?
I will just say that one of the things I like about this conference is that it mashes together very different perspectives and takes on a same general topic. And I learned a lot from this panel, and I'm especially intrigued by the way that we're all going at metaphor and maybe even the ethics of metaphor in different ways. I don't have a question. I'm just trying to get my head around what I've heard. So thank you all for including me.
It was a great combination.
I had a very small question, but Anna, have you read Gerard Manley Hopkins?
Not in a long time, but yes.
I just your work reminded me of him. I really like him, so you might check it out.
Yes, thank you. That's a huge compliment in my mind. And I also haven't read Ponge in a long time, and I really appreciate his work
That's
too.
another. Yeah, they're both this. Yeah, the microspecificity of nature. Yeah.
Yep.
If anyone won't mind answering the question, I was wondering if um, any of your work in this eco literature, whether through creative writing or research, I wonder if it has been shaping or transforming your relationship with the natural world in any way, or if so, I'm curious about how has that trajectory been so far. If anyone have any thoughts on that.
I'll pipe up and say that I don't know if it's true or not, but I tend to think that I don't know what I think until I actually write it. And so I think that every time I write, especially a poem, I'm trying to figure out what I think about it. And if I surprise myself, all the better. So I'm learning as I'm thinking when I'm writing.
Yeah, I really love that, and I can really connect with thoughts about nature, but also thoughts about anything that it's interesting how the act of writing itself becomes that kind of a vehicle of thinking as well. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons why writing is so powerful. So yeah, it's great. Anyone else? If not, I think that's the end of our session and the end of Monday LCLC. And thanks again, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.